Thank you, Katie. Good morning and happy sunny Friday. I'm Dr. Brandy Lovelady Mitchell. I'm an APC co-chair, Board of Trustees member, and the 4th through 12th grade work group co-chair.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Evelyn Esparza Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director at the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan and KConnect partner. Before we get started, we're going to ask you to please answer a quick question for us. How many Accountability Partners Council meetings have you attended? You are going to see the question on your screen right now. Perfect. It looks like a lot of you have been with us for quite a long time. For those of you that are new, we welcome you and we hope that you have a great time with us today. Before we get started with our agenda, I'd like to introduce you to some of the people that make our work possible. Our work group co-chairs, facilitators, board of trustees, lead convening partners, and of course, our backbone team.
We know that the backbone team does not like to get credit for things, but I just want to make sure that we're sending the messages of thanks and love today because they do a lot of great work. So today we will be breaking out into breakout rooms for a gallery walk and feedback. Each breakout group today has been assigned a table captain. They are here to answer your questions and help you walk through the entire process. We encourage you to fully participate in the group discussions in order to get the most out of this convening.
The Accountability Partners Council is where the entire network gathers to seek perspective and gather feedback on the work that KConnect brings forward. Who is the network? If you're on this call today, you're part of the network. It includes all of the people I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, plus anyone who is interested in closing disparity gaps and advancing equity for children and adults in King County. We encourage you to invite people to be part of the network if they have passion for our work or focus areas. Linked in the chat is our website. Please direct your colleagues to it if they have any questions or if they would like to be involved in our work.
Thank you, Evelyn. When the APC was first developed, it was based on 5 cultural values. Those values are yes and, which means try to accept what your other group members are saying and then expand on that line of thinking. Try not to say no. Experimentation. Everything we do is somewhat experimental. This is an environment that says got it, not gotcha. Accountability. Accountability means that the work group gives an overview of their plans, which the APC affirms with feedback. Decision rules. We use a low pressure decision-making method when presented with strategies or other initiatives. And last, perhaps the most significant is listening. Listening is essential. Please listen well to everyone in your group during the full APC in your life beyond this convening as well.
The APC is a brave space, not a safe space. A safe space is nurture for comfort, which can reinforce current power dynamics. A brave space, on the other hand, has 5 elements: controversy with stability, owning intentions and impacts, challenge by choice, reflect, and no attacks. These elements make for a space where everyone feels welcome and they can speak freely. Let's ensure that our convening today is a brave space, not a safe space.
Let's take a moment to review what we accomplished at the November APC. We heard updates from 2 very important KConnect initiatives, the Housing Stability Alliance and One Doulas. We learned about the work that our lead convening partners are doing in their specific spaces. And Ron Kaler from Kent ISD reviewed the superintendent search process, and the APC provided feedback on what should be considered during the job.
Now, our agenda for today's meeting includes hearing continued updates from important KConnect initiatives, learning more about KConnect's vision and providing feedback on the direction. We would be experiencing a gallery walk on the KConnect's vision with an opportunity to provide feedback. We will learn more about the student wellbeing work that is happening in our community and how that might impact KConnect's dashboard. You can find all of today's meeting information, including slides and forms, at the link listed on the screen, but it's also in the chat box.
And at this time, I'm so excited to turn it over to Dr. Ledrian Roby, Superintendent of Grand Rapids Public Schools.
Thank you, Brandy. Good morning and welcome, everyone. As Brandy said, I'm Dr. Ledrian Roby, and it's my honor and privilege of serving as your superintendent of Grand Rapids Public Schools. While I'm still kind of new to KConnect, let me just say, first of all, how much I appreciate the mission and collective work that we are doing to ensure that all students and all children in Kent County have an equitable path to economic prosperity through quality education, family, and community support. There's a lot of talk around equity, but we have to get past the talking, right? I'm all about equity in action. We know now more than ever in the midst of this global pandemic that we further have exposed and widened achievement gaps among our highest poverty, highest need students, and we have to unite to align resources and support to advance changes to significantly improve outcomes. And I'm gonna say that again, this pandemic has awakened those who may not have realized there is an achievement gap, and it impacts our highest poverty, highest need young people, and we have to put our resources together if we really are going to make a difference. I believe that this is a defining moment for GRPS and also for the greater Grand Rapids area. We have to fully leverage federal funding so that we've been able to receive, right? We also have to engage this community, both our internal and external stakeholders, in the GRPS strategic planning process that we kicked off this past month. GRPS gained national and statewide attention and success for the GRPS transformation plan that was initiated in 2012, but a lot has changed. And we all know that since March of 2020, our world has significantly changed. I'm asking you to join with GRPS, be a part of our planning process for the future of GRPS. Our Board of Education leadership team have been crystal clear on the expectations of being intentional, authentic, making this a comprehensive stakeholder engagement plan. In fact, we want to raise the bar and are very committed to working with our community partners to further mold, shape, and enhance engagement from the beginning, middle, and end. Please stay tuned for more information about upcoming updates around our strategic planning process. And as always, if you have questions related to our strategic planning process, please contact me or our Executive Director, Mr. John Helmholt, who is the point of contact with Greenway Strategic Facilities, Greenway Leadership Team. They're helping to kind of facilitate our strategic planning process. Now I'd like to turn it over to Kiara Baskin and Symphony Davis to learn more about the Day One Doula Collective.
Thanks, Dr. Roby. I'm Kiara Baskin, the Program Manager for the Day One Doula Collective, and unfortunately, Symphony won't be able to join me today, but I'll go ahead and get us started. So the Day One Doula Collective was formerly known as the Birth Equity Strategy. It was really identified through KConnect's prenatal to third grade work group, which is a team of individuals committed to improving disparate outcomes for children between birth and third grade. It aims to improve kindergarten readiness in Kent County by ensuring babies born in our community are born at a healthy weight. That means weighing more than 5.5 pounds and having a healthy start to life. The data in Kent County The data in King County shows that Black babies are more than twice as likely to be born at a low birth weight or die within the first year of life in comparison to white babies. Through an intentional process involving community engagement, national research, and local data analysis, the Birth Equity through Doulas of Color strategy was developed and affirmed by the APC back in November of 2018. This two-level approach equips a cohort of women of color with the necessary training and certifications to provide doula support services, who will then in turn provide services to women of color in Kent County. We particularly are focused on the zip codes 49507, 49504, and 49503. The community-based doula program training started back in January, and we've been rocking it out even in the middle of a pandemic. Currently, we have 11 doulas participating in our program, and we are utilizing a hybrid model for our training sessions. Our training sessions are held every Wednesday evening from 6 to 9 p.m. We've gotten great feedback from our program participants, and we're really excited just to see their growth as community doulas. Some of our session topics that we've completed thus far include communications, adolescent development, the history of midwifery and obstetrics, doula support during labor and delivery. And what's really unique about our program is that we're also exposing our doulas to the midwifery model of care and home birth. So we've covered that topic as well. We are continually looking for opportunities to increase our capacity to engage in policy and advocacy. So the Michigan Council for Maternal Child Health did reach out to the Day One Doula program, requesting our contribution regarding an issue paper to highlight the impacts of doulas in Michigan. This project specifically wanted to include the voices of doulas and doula programs to really better illustrate the work and how crucial it is to supporting birthing and postpartum individuals and improving birth outcomes. The policy considerations and briefing were made available to the public back in January. Legislative Director Brian Merlos and Senator Erica Geis of Region 10 have convened several meetings with the statewide Michigan Doula Coalition related to the legislative movement for doulas and Medicaid reimbursement in Michigan. Each region does have identified representation, and I currently serve as the representative for Region 4. March 22nd through March 28th was Doula Appreciation Week in the state of Michigan, and the doulas of Day One had a jam-packed week in celebration to kick off the week. And doulas across the region did join us virtually for a ceremonious reading of a proclamation that we were able to pen and have acknowledged. We currently have 2 interns that are working with Day One, both at Grand Valley State University. These are some amazing women. The first that you see on the left is Atavia Williams. She is a senior at Grand Valley State University and has a dual major in women, gender, and sexuality studies and public and nonprofit administration. So Atavia will coordinate, facilitate, and aid in numerous tasks with our program while assisting with the development of inclusionary outreach. And then Erin is a 3rd semester GVS nursing student who will be working alongside Day One as part of her honor senior program. Erin will be helping to facilitate our collaboration with the national initiative Dulce. Dulce has traditionally focused on pediatric health and provided support to patients and families through through an interdisciplinary team approach. But within this pilot program, Erin will be assisting in the exploration of the implementation of Dulce into the prenatal space. Black Maternal Health Week was founded by Black Mamas Matter Alliance, and it takes place every year from April 11th through the 17th. The month of April is recognized in the United States as National Minority Health Month, a month-long initiative to advance health equity across the country on behalf of all racial and ethnic minorities. The campaign and activities for Black Maternal Health Week serve to amplify the voices of Black mamas and center the values and traditions of the reproductive and birth justice movements. Activities are rooted in human rights, reproductive justice, and birth justice frameworks. So what you see here is just our collective and community members, and even some of our youngest community members, just really being invested in the work that we're doing and also walking alongside other organizations in pursuit of health equity and reproductive justice. For more information and to keep up with the most recent updates, make sure to follow us on social media. We'll also be launching our website soon, so stay tuned. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Kathy Glynn and Mike Nassar to discuss the literacy landscape updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. So the early childhood literacy is part of the prenatal to third grade domain work group's focus area. It's specifically an indicator of success for third grade reading. And third grade reading proficiency has emerged as a highly predictive factor of future life outcomes, not just academically, but also in the areas of employment, health, and interaction with the criminal legal system. So based on the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment of 2019, 23% of Black children, 25% of Hispanic children, and 53% of white children in Kent County were ready for kindergarten. Also in 2019, 23% of Black children, 32% of Hispanic children, and 63% of white children in third grade met the third grade reading proficiency standards on the M-STEP assessment in Kent County. So given that background, in August of 2019, and again in June of 2020, an early childhood literacy landscape convening was held with participation from a cross-section of organizations involved in the early childhood literacy system in Kent County. At the first convening, participants learned more about the various literacy efforts and initiatives that were active in Kent County. And they also engaged in conversations and activities aimed at considering opportunities to further advance literacy across the county. So the convening resulted in the development of a common goal statement, which you see on the slide here, that participants co-created along with the establishment of a leadership team to move the work forward. And this is the leadership team. We've been meeting monthly since September of 2019. And we discussed ways to actualize our goal statement. And we began by sharing information, data, and research, along with the tools and resources currently being used to advance early literacy outcomes. And I think this team is just a great example of collective impact and systems work. So we noted from our research that there are numerous efforts underway across the community to support literacy, and many schools are creating and incorporating literacy tools into their practices. So with that, we believe there's an opportunity for community-based organizations to align and coordinate efforts for maximum impact to improve literacy outcomes. And we also believe there's an opportunity to engage families with children between the ages of 0 and 5 to better understand literacy practices in the home and to discover where opportunities might exist to provide additional resources and support for families. We decided the best way to understand those needs was to ask. So we surveyed 9 organizations and the families they serve. And so at this point, I'm going to transition over to Mike, who's going to share how the survey was created and administered in the organizations that participated in the survey.
Thanks, Kathy. As Kathy said, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the development of the survey and then just share a little bit of initial survey data at the end. So I'm Mike Nassar, Director of the Community Literacy Initiative at the Literacy Center of West Michigan. And the Literacy Center, working in partnership with KConnect and Western Michigan University, surveyed families and organizations in our community to better understand the current state of early childhood literacy practices and behaviors. And funding for this project was provided by Lake Michigan Credit Union. So it was important to members of the Literacy Landscape team that the survey tool be based on research-supported literacy behaviors and best practices. And the Michigan Early Literacy Task Force has developed 8 documents to support literacy instruction efforts in our state. Our team focused on the birth to age 3 document, which you see pictured here, and we also focused on the pre-kindergarten document. And we wanted a tool that was designed to support those community-based organizations and caregivers to self-assess the extent to which their literacy behaviors align with identified best supported best practices. Our final surveys focused, as Kathy indicated, on caregivers with children ages birth to 5 and organizations serving this population. So what you see here is a snapshot of the evolution of our survey tool, and we focused on what's known as Literacy Essential 10, which is to work with families to promote home language and literacy environments that are rich and responsive. And we focused on 3 key practices within that domain. We focused on the importance of encouraging what parents do in their own home, and also to communicate that all family members are a part of the children's home language and literacy environment and can support their development, along with acknowledging and honoring the family's innate wisdom and ability to support and parent. So the final surveys included options for caregivers for children with birth to 3, or 4-year-old, or both groups. It also included the same for organizations, and it was administered in Spanish and English and was done primarily electronically through phones, pads, and computers. And as Kathy mentioned, I want to thank the 9 pilot organizations that participated in our survey, which was conducted from March 17th to April 18th. I had the pleasure of meeting individually with representatives of those organizations, and many of them are also represented on our early literacy landscape team. So it really was a collaborative effort. Our original goal was to get 100 survey responses. That was a number that Mark and the data team thought would be a representative number. And I'm so happy to report that we actually had 169 caregivers that responded. And we also had 9 languages represented, even though our survey was in Spanish and English. Of the survey respondents, 28% identified Spanish as their native home language, and 19% or over 30 households self-identified as African American. You can also see that looking at the data that we had a large number of children in each group. We had 81 children in ages 4 to 5. We had 41 or 42 that had children, 1 child in each age group. We also had a very good response from our pilot organizations with 99 surveys completed. And I want to thank the organizations that participated. Some did 1 survey, or they did a committee completing a survey. And others such as KISD and GSRP did many, many internal surveys. And you can also see here a couple examples of the type of questions we asked. So in the center, you see an example of a yes/no question. And below that, you see an example of a prompt that allowed parents to indicate the frequency with which they engaged in the behavior that's described there. I do want to say that starting next week and continuing on from here, the Early Childhood Literacy Landscape team will be meeting, and with help from the Data Capacity Work Group, we'll be reviewing the survey findings, and our plan is to use this data to identify opportunities to close the literacy gaps for children in our community. Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Christine Keller and Rochelle Scott for the Housing Stability Alliance update.
Can I actually just jump in really quick, Christina, before you go? Thanks. I want to say, I hope you guys took notice of the survey work that Mike and Kathy and the team has done. I think so many times that we do work asking questions, surveys, focus groups, whatever, in this community, we don't reach into the communities that we need to hear from. And we have a hard time doing that. And I think what they developed here along the way is a best practice, and they blew the numbers out of the water. They got a lot of different demographics. I think they had like 6 different languages that people, people responded that were native speakers within their households. I was really blown away. And I think, what they did is they went through partner organizations that were trusted within different communities. And that really made all the difference. So I think as a network, I think we need to take note of that and implement that best practice across our network as we're doing things like that. And so I was just blown away by the work they had done.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate your help.
I support that, and thank you, Mark, for highlighting that. It's great work that was done. So I'm Christina Keller, president of Cascade Engineering and co-chair of the Housing Stability Alliance.
And I'm Rochelle Scott, Vice President of Business Development at Rockford Construction and a longtime member of the Housing Stability Alliance. So for more than 2 years, KConnect has brought together cross-sector stakeholders and facilitated a process that built trust, explored data, and ultimately developed tools that led to a better understanding of the current state of housing insecurity in our community. This led to a movement that is called the Housing Stability Alliance. The Alliance is a group of nearly 100 individuals, including me, and organizations from all sectors working together to improve outcomes for children and families dealing with housing insecurity. The final deliverable from the 2-year process was a community plan, which we refer to as the Common Agenda and Roadmap, that laid out a framework to create an equitable housing system for everyone with a targeted focus on Black and Latinx children and families who are disproportionately impacted by housing insecurity. I want to thank the funders and also the Alliance members who have supported this work over the last 2 years. I also want to thank KConnect. I know we thanked them previously, but I definitely want to also take this time to thank them for all of their effort because it has been an incredibly heavy lift. So a 5-part approach was developed. One section of the framework focused on the creation of a backbone organization to lead the work, collect and analyze the data, of which there was a lot, convene partners, and operationalize the common agenda and roadmap. Christina, over to you.
With the release of the community plan in August 2020, KConnect completed the work that it had committed to when agreeing to take the project on in 2018. So along with the other Housing Stability Alliance co-chairs, Mayor Rosalind Bliss, Chair Mandy Bolter, and Lynn Farrell, we committed to moving the Alliance forward and to work to bring people out of the yellow and red spectrum and into the green of housing stable. However, without a backbone organization focused solely on advancing the movement, it lost some momentum, and it was apparent it was necessary to get a backbone in place quickly in order to keep the work moving forward. So after a series of discussion, KConnect agreed to partner with the Alliance co-chairs to temporarily lead the work to create a not-for-profit organization that will serve as a backbone for this Alliance work.
So the role of KConnect is not to ultimately serve as the Alliance backbone. It is, however, serving as temporary support to launch the permanent backbone that will soon be its own entity. So in February, the organization became its own 501c3 with its own bank account, bylaws, and 5-year budget. The co-chairs are currently in the process of selecting members to sit on the board of trustees. Their first task will be the hiring of a full-time president to lead the organization. Until that time, KConnect's president, Salvador Lopez, is the interim director. The new backbone will also be responsible for securing long-term funding. As of today, funding for this new organization has been provided by the Fry Foundation and the Wege Foundation. So in the meantime, KConnect will act as a contact expert to help get the new organization off the ground.
So as Rachel said, we are in the process of choosing members to sit on the newly developed board of trustees for the organization, and the next steps will include hiring. And this is a really important work because equitable housing stability in our community is urgently important. Pass it to Mark.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that delay. Just doing some stuff behind the scenes. Next, we want to talk about we've had some time to bring Sal on board and reflect on the things that we do well and the things that we want to sort of improve on. And so we want to take you through kind of looking at some of our plans for the network and the vision and get some feedback from all of you. Slide, please. But first, we wanted to sort of take you through just a little bit of history around KConnect. I have quickly become the elder statesman of KConnect and the historian, I guess. And some of this actually predates me, but KConnect all started with a seed of an idea. And I think about 2011, when community leaders got together and they started investigating. They started investigating the collective impact movement. Some of the foundations pitched in, and we were able to investigate that as a community, bring in an organization called FSG and sort of do some investigation and completion of a common agenda and roadmap that was published in 2013. That steering committee then went on to hire the first president, Pam Perriott, and we became independent 501c3. In 2014, our first work group launched, and that was the prenatal to third grade work group. And while they deal with the youngest folks in our continuum, they're our oldest work group. Also alongside that was our data and capacity work group. Quickly following, in the beginning of the year, our equity and inclusion work group launched. We had our lead convening partners, which you'll learn more about in a little bit. If you don't know that term, our lead convening partners met for the very first time all together as a group. And our data dashboard went live, which many of you use as a resource and have seen. In 2016, our first Accountability Partner Council meeting was held. It was a partnership with the Essential Needs Task Force. At that time, Tracy Kaufman was heading that up. And our high school to career work group launched. We developed a strategic partnership with the Essential Needs Task Force of Kent County to be our home and family stability work group. Many of you know our work plan and understand that we have a foundational work group called Home and Family Stability, and we didn't want to duplicate efforts with the Essential Needs Task Force. We saw some real advantage to that strategic partnership, and that's just been a wonderful thing for us. And now that Wendy Randall is there, really sort of knocking it out of the park, especially during the pandemic. And then our community engagement work group met for the very first time. Slide, please. In 2017, our 4th through 12th grade work group launched, and KConnect received a National Tableau Data Fellowship. In 2018, KConnect, as many of you know this story, received a letter from a number of advocates, a number of community leaders rather, asking us to look into housing and help convene that space. Our board of trustees ended up approving that as it aligned with our mission. And then KConnect and First Steps Kent partnered on the Pritzker Fellow for Early Childhood. And as we all know, Anissa Eddy was the national fellow for early childhood in Kent County, and just did an amazing job. And you're seeing a lot of the fruits of that work today. And just an amazing person who is now getting her PhD at Michigan State. In 2019, KConnect lifted a whole second collective impact, because we thought one wasn't enough, around housing. And that's the work that you heard a lot, you've heard today around the Housing Stability Alliance and the work that's being done there. Our board went through a leadership experience that was I think it was 12 months in the making. And we heard a report out about that at an APC. I think it was November of 2019, but I'm not entirely sure. I think that's what it was. But I think that our board got together and basically said, like, hey, there's some different leadership skills that need to take place in a collective impact that's different than just being governance of a 501c3. And so what are those? And they really got together and built that leadership experience. In 2020, our Housing Stability Alliance was formed after the planning process that we went through in 2019. The Common Agenda and Roadmap was published for the Housing Stability Alliance. If you have not seen that, I'm sure we can put a link in the chat if you guys have not read that. We said goodbye to an old president, and we welcomed Salvador Lopez, our new president for KConnect, late last year. And in 2021, we're looking for, toward the future and toward the years, what we're gonna do this year. And we really entered a new phase of the housing work that provides strategy support to help launch the Housing Stability Alliance backbone, and really kind of making sure that that backbone was positioned well, working on some of the hiring and things like that. So, and then as we look forward to the rest of 2021, as our housing focus is changing a little bit, I wouldn't say exactly winding down, but changing a little bit, we want to refocus our efforts on the core work groups. And many of you may, remember the core work groups when they were called domain work groups. And we just sort of changed that phrasing because we thought core work groups were a little better way of talking about those. But our core work groups are prenatal to third grade work group, our 4th through 12th grade, high school to career, and even our home and family stability as well. And so with that, I want to hand it over to Salvador to talk about what we see for this year and moving forward with KConnect.
Thank you, Mark. And a special thank you to Katie, Brandy, and Evelyn, and all of you that have put so much time and effort into creating this May APC. First and foremost, buenos dias. How's everybody doing? I really appreciate you all being here, especially those that made it in super early. I know that this is a Friday. I know it's beautiful outside, and I know that this is 4 hours of your time. So I want to make sure that I note that I'm appreciative of that. But with that said, I appreciate Mark's looking back as our historian, as we joke in the office. I think it is important to look back and have a strong understanding of what brought us here before we can look to move forward. The timeline indicated that the past 7 years have brought about the completion of significant milestones and new opportunities for the network. In a few minutes, we will ask you to join us for a virtual gallery walk where we will encourage you to give us feedback about some of our ideas and to provide overall guidance. It's always been important for KConnect to be informed and advised by this group, and I want to make sure we continue that practice. Today's APC includes informational updates about several initiatives that have been a big part of KConnect's work for the past 2 years. The pandemic has certainly affected the way we work, and KConnect did its best to keep up with strategies while living in a virtual world. In some ways, our current way of life has allowed us to connect with members individually more often. In other ways, it has made it more challenging for many of our groups to meet regularly, given the challenges of juggling responsibilities at home, adjusting to a new way of life professionally, and living through the challenges that the pandemic has brought into our communities. Given so much uncertainty, I think it's important that we go back to KConnect's strengths while also doing our best to shift the way we work within our network. As I have taken a look at a lot of the feedback of what has made KConnect special, as well as areas where we can improve, we are focused on refining the way we approach our work. After a staff transition in 2019, KConnect was unable to maintain its staffing model for the equity and inclusion work group. In 2021, we're well positioned to provide a unique opportunity to energize equity work and determine new permanent structures for equity grounded in the experience of the past 7 years. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated existing racial disparities, and along with the increased demand and community organizing for racial equity, has increased awareness for many in the community. The pandemic has also tapped into the already limited capacity of nonprofit partners. And we know that many of the people that served as experts in the equity space for KConnect are in the front lines of community service today. We currently are meeting with thought partners and equity experts that are looking closely at KConnect's institutional knowledge and its mission. Alongside these thought partners, we will build an innovative equity space within KConnect with a strong reputation within our network. Collective impact is at its best when the network is consistently and effectively expanding. So considering how best to recruit new people committed to equity throughout the networks is also a need. Any new network member should be onboarded to KConnect's equity commitment and journey so that institutional knowledge isn't lost. Regardless of the path going forward, a clear plan with manageable expectations will help construct, embed, and sustain DEI work in this. Will also help us decentralize layers of the network to understand KConnect's equity structures and how they can expect to interact with these structures specifically. Going forward, due attention must be paid to how efficacy and impact of equity structures are measured. KConnect has already integrated equity into its outcome measures. It is clear for anyone looking at the data dashboard that equity impact is critical to the network. Given the same attention to understanding the efficacy of the network process is enhancing equity and how it can galvanize the network members and keep them committed to integrating in all aspects of their work. The housing work was a heavy lift that has taken over 3 years. Looking back on that experience, KConnect learned a lot and proved to be a true backbone organization capable of going into spaces that otherwise were seen as too conflicting or strenuous. Overall, moving the Housing Stability Alliance group to creating a community plan and now helping to create the backbone entity that will continue the movement surpassed even KConnect's expectations. The following part of the APC includes a vision casting gallery walk. There are currently some significant shifts happening and we need your help. I believe that now is a good time for KConnect's network to explore the entire prenatal to career continuum, which may involve consolidating or reorganizing core work groups or sequencing focus on specific areas of the continuum for given periods of time, AKA the housing work that we've done in the past. In addition, many domain or core work groups have transitioned from ideation and data collection to determining strategies and community pilot projects. The potential changes will ultimately shift KConnect's role in community, as well as how community perceives KConnect. Okay, well, at this point, I do want to get onto an action item, right? I think KConnect and its network and the APC is typically pretty used to kind of rolling up their sleeves and working. We always expect folks to come to these meetings, roll up their sleeves and work, right? So that we are going to dive right in there. So if you've been maybe not fully engaged, we're hoping that you fully engaged through what we call today's gallery walk. For the gallery walk, you will be going through 4 different rooms. Katie will be sharing a link in the chat. This will include a gallery guide. The 4 gallery walk rooms include the core work groups. Please note that we are not redefining these groups, but we are refining the work and getting back on task after having focused on housing and working around the pandemic the last couple of years. The second group will include the cross-cutting work groups. This portion will explore a framework to visualize how cross-cutting work groups fit into the KConnect mission. The third group includes the lead convening partners, and part of today's discussion will collect feedback on how to redefine or build upon the roles of our lead convening partners. Lastly, the fourth group is the strategy support group. In this room, we will be diving into ways that KConnect can help support organizations that are looking to close equity gaps, but have significant challenges or barriers that limit how much they can do. We hope that the different aspects of the vision in these rooms will inform our work moving forward. If you haven't participated in a gallery walk before, it's a breakout session that offers the opportunity to dive deeply into the work of KConnect while offering feedback on what has been presented. Sometimes these gallery walks are exploring data, diving into process, or getting feedback on our cross-cutting work. This one will be focused on how the components of KConnect are working together to eliminate disparities in our communities within the prenatal to career continuum. Typically what you see up on the screen there is folks walking from one area to the other. We're not able to do that physically yet, but we will do our very best to bring that experience to you virtually. I'll now pass it on to Katie to break down the details.
I'll start for our group. As far as the focus piece of it, we kind of came to the conclusion we want it both ways. That continue to focus on the prenatal through career, however, maintain that flexibility. And
it had a lot of formal community support around policing and reform in that space. So what would it look like to offer community groups that are kind of doing that work in a way that's not really supported formally yet in our communities to do some of that work for KConnect? And making sure that we think about what success looks like, not only by some of those data metrics, but also by the community, by impacted communities. I think they should be the ones that, we think they should be the ones that determine success.
Thank you, Erica.
I'll jump in next for our group, as it's somewhat similar. We started talking about, that I actually liked the idea of focusing on one thing, but really there are so many disparities that we can't really just focus on one, and that really just brought us to really focusing on diversity and inclusion. And making sure that we're not fixing people, we're fixing systems. We're not just doing programs. We don't have this ideology of trying to, there's something wrong with people, we need to fix them. We need to actually fix the systems. And then holding each other and everyone in this space accountable to that. And so part of what we talked about was having either some type of contract or a commitment guide, who are you and what are you actually doing? What actions are you taking and what progress has your organization made toward these things? And then really getting funders in that space and making sure that they're, we're encouraging them to be in the space, but also making sure that they're funding those things as well. Funding systems change and DEI as well. So that was kind of a lot of what our group talked about. If I missed anything, somebody please let me know. But the last point was making sure that everyone a part of this space participated in Civic Lab so that there was that commitment then to doing systems change.
Thank you for your comment.
I can share out for our team. A lot of what we discussed was sounded like shared in other groups as well. One thing that we had talked about was having common threads, which allow agencies and individuals to see themselves in the work. So we thought it was going to be a both and approach as well. So really being able to connect via shared efforts with various levels and methods of engagement, and then giving organizations the flexibility to standardize it for their work. So there's some commonalities or common understanding, but flexible enough to make sense for those individual organizations and institutions. Also, really leaning on community wisdom and paying community for their expertise and generating that from within, and a focus on DEI policy structures. Those were things that were discussed. If my team feels like if there's anything else left out, please jot it in the chat. But I think that's pretty much without repeating what other folks have shared.
Hey, Cassie, one of the things I talked about was the equity checklist that we use in our health and health policies work. And maybe some of you have used that tool, but it is one way to make sure that you're questioning yourself about these policies that may have unintended consequences that you didn't realize before. So the lens helps, again, some questioning of your system policies and all that might be helpful to share with this group.
I'll report from our group next. Very similar conversations. Our group would probably vote for the broader perspective rather than the specific, but really just making sure that there's engagement with voices from the community, especially Black and Brown organizations and communities, and be specific when it comes to identifying specific systemic barriers. So broad, but focused on the systemic barriers that can be addressed.
And our group had a lot of the same ideas, kind of thinking maybe a hybrid approach could be best, where in some cases it's nice to just have a focus that everybody is very aware of. Somebody said, like, you have to be blind to not know that housing has been like a focus lately, right? You just know that. At the same time, we were worrying if there was only a couple areas of focus that some people who don't like fit in that area naturally might like lose engagement or momentum. So like, just because we might have an area or two of greater focus doesn't mean the other ones aren't getting any attention at all. Yet when we try to do lots of things, it's easy to have some parts kind of flounder. So we talked a little bit about like keeping momentum and continuity, like, you know, like co-chairs for committees with the pandemic, especially. Perhaps some of them just can't give as much as they expected to. Like, if anybody needs to step down, is anybody else ready to step up? Or how can we have succession planning so that there's continuity even when people do switch positions and things like that? And we thought that if we just had a couple areas of focus without looking at the broader system, it in some ways is turning a blind eye to the complicated mess that exists. These aren't silos, everything's interconnected. So if we just try to focus on something and are not thinking about the broader view, then we're really going to miss things and not affect these systemic issues that other groups have raised.
Appreciate the comments.
Hi, so I will just say that the conversation that was reflected here was also very much reflected in our tables conversation as well, that it's a yes and, that you can't choose to do one or the other because there's going to be areas that become emergent and you have to have an intense focus on. But if you leave other areas essentially unchecked, then those will end up becoming a focus area because problems will arise. So as you're determining like what area you would want to focus on next, you know, consider eligibility criteria, how much community resources, not just financial, but, you know, awareness, advocacy, those things that are already available in the community, and how impactful it will be if you are focusing on that area. I think one example that was brought up, and, you know, as people have been mentioning housing, we all know that that is a major issue in our community and has been for quite some time. And that there are issues that lead to homelessness that are more upstream. So are there ways that we can get ahead of these key focus areas and focus on some of that upstream work so that we can be more impactful in the long term?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Courtney. Other groups? I'll ask a question of the group then. So it sounds like the majority of you want to take the approach that it's the both and or the yes and, which I think is also in line with one of KConnect's values. How do you suggest that you do that effectively without becoming so diffused that you're ineffective at anything? Thoughts?
I have a thought. I think that our community is so wealthy in resources, and especially information resources and relationships, that one entity doesn't have to be in every space at one time, that it really does, that the value of having so many partnerships is that we can have many people in different areas simultaneously, so that it doesn't have to live with just one organization to do all that work. And in that way, I think the work gets spread out and there aren't areas that are left, as Courtney said, unchecked, and that we have a wider reach that way.
Thanks, Mandy. Other comments or reflections?
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that one. Mandy, thanks for that. I think originally that was, and maybe still is, but originally that was the thought about the lead convening partner table. That KConnect doesn't have to be everywhere, but if we can hold this broad continuum of conveners, right? And we got a lot of feedback today on how to improve that model. And so I think we'll be thinking about some of that.
Thank you, Mark.
Something that came up in our group is, I think it was Heather that mentioned that, a lot conversation sometimes the change is hard to see and it's hard to measure, especially for folks that are involved sporadically. And so in our group, the discussion went into kind of like the civic lab training that we did with the Housing Stability Alliance and how that work was heading in one direction, and we were coming up with similar solutions that we've always come up with in Kent County. And that common language kind of changed that. And so when you mentioned, Eureka, how to not spread ourselves so thin, I think some possibly adding to the cross-cutting group, or as KConnect, looking at itself as addressing how we think and how, especially because a lot of the times when there's a problem that we want to tackle, we also invite the providers or the systems involved in the process. So then there's this, there's a rub, there's like a, this conflict that takes place, and we have to kind of protect the system itself, but also kind of, or KConnect has to serve as mediator between that system. So I think, I guess one of the solutions to that is possibly providing that common language across all of the work groups, so that when the solutions do happen, it's solutions that are involved in dissolving, and we're all speaking the same language when we're trying to tackle challenges. We're all thinking the same way about what it is to change, as opposed to come up with better ways to do what we're already doing.
Thank you, Sergio. Any additional thoughts, questions, comments, or reflection?
I agree with Sergio, and I also think that once we identify a common language, it'll help us know the how to do things, because we all agree that's an issue, but we all have different perspectives and different ways of imagining how it will be solved.
Sounds good. So let's probe for a little bit then even on the common language. So one way to develop the common language that he just referenced was through the Civic Lab training. So it's through capacity building supports. You can create common language. How else do you build or create a culture where there is a common language that's norm across the system? Any thinking around that?
Something that I often go back to are the community indicators that in the very beginning we had set up and committed ourselves to. So I wonder how that piece fits into this as well, the tracking and using that as a tool to measure progress.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Numbers, by the way, are a common language. Yeah. And the indicators definitely speak. Any other comments or reflection?
I would just like to say kind of what Sergio said. It's accountability, like basically just put it out there. How political are we willing to be? And, the data and the language we use, obviously we'd have to be all in it, but we can't be afraid that it's accountability. Maybe you don't want to use political, but accountability to the people who are making the decisions.
Yeah. So
I'm going to push back a little bit.
Yes.
Because there is a political piece to this as to why some of this isn't happening. There's an ideology that gets wrapped up, whether it's political or personal, but it is. And I think DEI has gotten political where it shouldn't be, which is unfortunate. And so I think there is going to have to be some push to be like, if this is what we're going to do and we're going to focus on, then you have to be unafraid to do it. Regardless of how someone might say, well, that's getting political. Well, no, it's not getting political. This is what we're focusing on, and this is an issue. I think if we stick to the issue, we can try to not do that. But part of the problem is some of that is wrapped up in politics.
I would agree. So maybe we use accountability, not the word political. Ugh.
Thank you for the dialogue. I think we have 1 minute left, and I'm sorry, Suzanne, I didn't see your hand over in the corner. So please ask your question or make your comment, and then we'll be ready for break. Yes. You're on mute.
I was going to add on to what one of the things that you asked specifically was this language. And I think it goes to your point where you said focusing on the data. That's something KConnect has been good with. And then a little bit of public relations, PR, that if you start using the language, then it gets picked up for, let's talk about getting picked up for good in the community. With the housing example, it's permeated a variety of conversations outside of the group that's here, but in larger conversations. So I think it is a little bit of messaging and communications that really needs to play into it. Outside of people going to Civic Lab, there are a lot of people that won't be there, but everybody else needs to hear it. That's it.
Okay, thank you so very much. And thanks for your patience for waiting to be called on. I apologize for not recognizing you sooner. All right, so with that, we now will go into round 2 conversations into your same table groups. In this round, it's basically to kind of deepen your thinking about the dialogue that we just had, to address any questions or comments or concerns that you might have in this meeting-wide conversation. So you'll now go back into your breakout groups, and you'll have 10 minutes, I believe.
All of the great work that you've been doing to make this run so smoothly. I also want to pull from that last conversation, because I think that our young scholars would really anchor this next part with loving the piece about equitable outcomes, love when we deeply listen to them, and more importantly, love when we have adjusted behavior and accountability wrapped up in them being empowered and thriving. So today, Heidi Katula and Sunil Joy are talking about an exciting opportunity to align the KConnect network to a pilot that is taking place within Kent ISD that endeavors to measure student well-being and deploy resources to address the growing social emotional needs of students. As you probably remember, student well-being is a KConnect indicator that was selected by the 4th through 12th grade work group and approved by this body in 2017. It is one of the 4 key indicators under the Career Readiness Success Measure. We knew when we approved this indicator that there wasn't reliable data to measure student well-being, but we knew that it was so important to student success that K through 12 needed a way to measure changes in student well-being over time, and of course, direct resources to address needs. This is an example of how KConnect works best, aligning leading practices and initiatives across the continuum so that children and families are successful from prenatal to career. So now I'm going to pass it over to Heidi and Sunil to discuss the Student Wellbeing Survey and KConnect indicator. Thank you, Heidi and Sunil.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Lovelady Mitchell. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the important topic of student voice and agency with you all today. The well-being of our students is critical to our schools, and it's vital to the long-term success of our students. Next slide. As Sal mentioned, one of the members of our presentation team and part of our committee was unable to be here today, but the 2 of us will be filling in. My name is Sunil Joy. I'm a data scientist and researcher with Kent ISD. A little bit about me, a few of you know me, some do not. I've been with Kent ISD for about 3 years or so. Sort of my role is around ensuring both our local districts and Kent ISD is making decisions based on evidence, research, and data. Previously to Kent ISD, I had worked at Education Trust Midwest, which is educational advocacy and research organization. Early in my career, actually, I started in community organizing, and that's certainly a lens that I bring to all of my work, including the work that you see here. I'm going to go ahead and have Dr. Heidi Katula introduce herself as well.
Good morning, everyone. It's been a pleasure getting to know you at my first KConnect session. Myself, I'm recently moved to West Michigan. This is my 3rd year as superintendent in East Grand Rapids Public Schools. Prior to coming over, I was in Oakland County and Wayne County, the Upper Peninsula, as well as Columbus, Ohio. Back in Oakland County, I was in Bloomfield Hills School District, Oakland County Intermediate School District, and then also in Wayne Westland Community Schools in Wayne County. As we go, I'll pull a little bit from my previous experiences as it also helped inform the work of the survey that we are presenting to you today. Go to the next slide, please. The purpose of our presentation has 4 components. Today, we're here to share and build awareness of how we are intentionally collecting student voice and building student agency. The feedback collection will honor and empower our students. We also will use this feedback to inform the work that we do as educators and administrators, as our students are our #1 priority and their voice is critical to our work. Through our session, we want to continue to find ways to collaborate within Kent County and also discuss how the survey data will inform KConnect's well-being indicator. Next slide, please. Thank you. Why it matters. Students are the whole reason we exist. Their voices are critical to the work that we do and essential. We can't do what we do and meet their needs if we aren't collecting their feedback and using their voice to inform our work. There are 3 domains within this survey, the first being student engagement. When you look at research from Gallup specifically, it shows that students who are engaged are 2.5 times more likely to say they do well in school and 4.5 times more likely to be hopeful about their future. We also know that engagement tends to be the highest in the early grades, but it drops as students get older. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our world is quickly becoming more and more diverse. Research from the census shows that the majority of children under the age of 15 in the United States are actually students of color. Just in Kent County, 4 in 10 students are non-white, and this has increased rapidly in the last 2 decades. When it was closer to 1/4 of students, we've changed tremendously. This coincides with the social unrest from last summer, which highlighted the systemic racism that exists in our country. And lastly, social emotional learning. These are the characteristics and values we know are predictors of success later in life. In general, we have to measure what matters. We have a lot of measurement in education. We have to be intentional about collecting this additional information. The opinions and beliefs and values of our children are critical to our work. Also, with the pandemic and the social unrest, student voice matters now more than ever. Next slide, please. Social emotional learning. Chicago Public Schools for many years has conducted a survey on their own. It's gone through a number of different iterations over the years, but currently it's referred to as the 5 Essentials Survey. And a recent study was conducted there with their 9th graders to examine the impact of schools that built the SEL skills of their students very intentionally. The researchers found that the higher the SEL skills were linked to outcomes like better academics, graduating high school, and enrollment in college. Moreover, social emotional learning measures were actually more predictive than other measures in determining students' long-term success. Next slide, please. Our process. When I came to Kent County, I was new to East Grand Rapids. We needed to review our strategic plan and update our strategic plan, but we did not have a mechanism within Kent County that was systemic to collect student voice. Through the work that we were planning to do, you can be on either one, thank you. I was working with the ISD to determine how can we go about that work. And we looked at what has been done in other counties. I leaned back, you can go to the next slide, please, to Oakland County and pulled on the survey that had been given for almost a decade there. And those surveys were 3 data points: students, staff, and parents. So when we were doing our work, we pulled on that one, but I was also lifting the conversation with the superintendents within the Kent Intermediate School District. We started, all of us, talking about the essential and critical need to collect student voice. And so that started the journey towards where we would be going. We very much looked to see what could we glean from Oakland County as well as other surveys in the area, so that we were intentional about what questions we'd be asking, the areas that we would be collecting feedback on, and then the strategies moving forward to inform that work. Next slide, please. We had a Kent Intermediate Superintendent Association, which is KISA, retreat back in October of 2019. KISA is made up of 20 superintendents across Kent Public Schools. And at our fall retreat, we introduced the concept more broadly around collecting student voice. The idea was for us to create a single common measure that would capture our number one data point, which is stakeholders' voice and the experiences that our students are having at school. This is a word cloud, as you see on the slide, from the feedback that we received from the superintendents at the retreat regarding what we wanted to take away. You see common language, local, common, comparative, community, actionable were top considerations in the work that we would do moving forward. Sunil?
Next slide. So this is just an overview of our timeline since the fall of 2019, just to show you where we're at currently. So as Dr. Katula mentioned, after this concept was introduced back at the fall KISA retreat, again, KISA being the Superintendent's Association, an ad hoc survey committee was formed in the winter of 2020. The survey committee was made up of area superintendents, along with members of KISA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion subcommittee, standing committee. The original goal was for a field test to occur of the survey instrument in the spring of 2020. Obviously, that got derailed due to COVID. So we had to put things on pause as districts were scrambling to figure out how to educate their kids in the time of COVID. In the late fall of 2020 and winter of 2021, that ad hoc committee reconvened to finalize the actual instrument itself. And this eventually led to a field test, and we'll be going into detail on this in just a moment, which was 1 year later than intended, but better late than never. The next big step in our process is that this survey will be launched, the finalized survey that is, will be launched in all 20 of our public school districts, and that will be happening next school year. As previously mentioned, the survey covers 3 main domains. Our initial plan was to have the survey cover grades 5, 7, 9, and 11. We were intentional about those grades because we wanted to capture at least one snapshot of elementary school and thought that 5th grade was the earliest data point we could get. You know, often we think about with our kids and our students that we're advocating for them, when in reality, and this is a reflection that I had just in looking at the survey results, the field test results, is that adults should really be advocating for kids, and they in many ways are their best own advocates. Also, the reason for the grade levels is we wanted to get a snapshot again of elementary school, middle, and then twice in high school. A major inspiration for our survey process, we talked a little bit about Oakland schools, but another area that we studied in terms of our process and our survey comes from the core districts in California. Some of you are probably familiar with them. The core is a collaborative network of school districts. They consist of the 8 largest school districts in California. Sounds like I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. They consist of the 8 largest school districts in California, and they represent over 1 million students. So that's about 10 times the size of Kent IC's public school students. They're most known for their work around student, family, and parent voice through having reported publicly their student voice surveys or their family and community surveys. They also conduct social emotional surveys as well for the last several years. More importantly, the reason I wanted to cite this example, not just because they informed our work and our process, it's just an example of how local districts and local communities collaborated to elevate the role of student voice in decision making. Next slide. So before we actually began selecting questions themselves, our survey subcommittee actually had to figure out what competencies under each of the domains we actually wanted to measure. And these were based off of what research says and what evidence says around these larger domains. So let me walk through these very quickly. This is social emotional learning being the domain. Again, we have 3 domains. So under social emotional learning, some of the competencies that are being measured: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, sense of belonging. You know, do students feel like they belong in school? Responsible decision-making. Next slide. This is student engagement, the core competencies under this domain: teaching effectiveness, classroom climate, classroom rigor, valuing a subject. Do students actually value the things that they're learning in school? Are they engaged? And then growth mindset, which is very much a very strong predictor of future success. And then lastly, diversity, equity, inclusion, cultural awareness, welcoming environment, equitable access, high expectations, and policies and procedures. So one of the things you may note from seeing these 3 domains and the competencies is that one of the challenges was that there's clearly a lot of overlap between the competencies and also the domains themselves. They don't really fit into silos necessarily. What that really speaks to is, and this has come up as a theme throughout today's morning session, is that the student experience doesn't exist in a silo, and neither does this survey. And everything that we do is very much interconnected. Next slide. So the final step after looking at what competencies, what things we actually wanted to measure was, obviously we had to select the questions. So we started by creating a question bank that was aligned to the competencies through the subcommittee. Just to note, this is important for everyone to realize, is we didn't just start from scratch in terms of the questions. These are very well-known topics around the country. There's lots of survey questions on them. So we were looking at pre-existing surveys from around the country and locally as well to come up with a bank for our survey itself. We simply just wanted to create a tool that we felt reflected the needs of our local community and our districts, and that was a common measure across the region. I also want to note that we did partner with a number of local researchers throughout the process that weren't formal members of the subcommittee necessarily, but were helpful in specifically this stage itself. I want to take a moment to acknowledge them because a few of them are on the call here today at the APC. So these include Dr. Neil Carson and Laura Lucchese from Calvin University, Drs. David Steit and Kyle McQueen from Basis Policy Research, Dr. Jesse Bernal from Grand Valley State University's Equity and Inclusion Office, Dr. Rachel White, who's our national partner, who's a professor in Virginia and was actually a part of the core districts and did a lot of work there. So we're happy to have their support too. Also, Kentai Z team also supported Mark Maynard, Mark Rotman, Glenn Finkel, also Ron Kaler, who's been an advocate for student voice for a very long time. Next slide. From here, we conducted a field test. Next slide. And the purpose of that field test was to ensure that those questions were actually reflective of what we were asking. That field test took place between March and April of this year, so not too long ago. We had a pretty big sample of students that took it. 6,000 students participate in the field test, and that's going to give us lots of good information as we amend and make better the actual survey instrument. Next slide. Some immediate next steps before the launch. We're in the process of conducting one-on-one, what's called cognitive interviews with students. For those that are not familiar with a cognitive interview, essentially what the purpose of that is, we ask students on a one-on-one basis to walk through the entire survey and then ask them questions to probe around whether or not they understood the wording, what they're thinking about when they're answering certain questions, what their perspective and lens is, because we want to refine it and make it better for the future. This is especially important for our younger students because, again, we want to make sure that their voices are well represented and that the questions are actually reflecting what their opinions are. Later on, we're going to have small focus groups as well, which are more of a group setting as opposed to a one-on-one, and then a statistical analysis of the actual data itself for validation purposes. To note, we're getting some support through a partnership with the American Institutes for Research. If you're not familiar with them, they're a global research and evaluation firm. We're receiving direct consulting support from them through a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, who supports entities like ours on initiatives like this one. And finally, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, a full rollout of the survey is expected for next school year with all 20 school districts participating. Heidi?
Thank you, Sunil. At this time, we will be moved into breakout groups. We have put some questions together. If you could go to the next slide. The following questions have been put together to help guide the conversation and the thinking, as well as the feedback that we hope to gain. And so thank you for listening. Thank you for thinking and contributing to this work.
So let's go to the group that's there's probably a couple of groups out there that what are your initial thoughts or impressions of the survey, the partnership to fill this indicator around student well-being? Was there a group that had that question?
Mark, I think at least our group, we did all the questions, but I can answer just from a broad perspective. So we love that it was from the student voice and being informed. And also just the conversation around it, not just being a moment in time, but also perhaps being more regular in the future. So those are just some high level thoughts.
Great, thanks. Oh, sorry.
Nope, sorry. Same, our group appreciated the student voice too and incorporating them. We also felt like it was a good this is data we've been looking for a long time, and that it is it's an opportunity to explore, what are common issues in identifying a systems approach.
Yeah, our group discussed, first of all, it's great that this is happening. I think that part of the disengagement of students comes from the fact that middle and high school kids feel that they're not listened to, that they don't have a voice, which causes them to disengage because they're not listened to. But I think that to kind of answer the question about how schools and community can use the data, we would need more information about it's to see the data or even to know some of the questions that were asked, because we're not quite sure what's being asked. I know I would love to see it for certainly post-secondary data. So yeah, I think that the schools can use it pretty well. Also, just a respect for what KConnect has done with data and hoping that this will become a fairly easily accessible portal to see the data and to think about decision making reflecting that.
Yeah, Tony, I think that you make some good points there. I want to hand it over to maybe Sunil. You're probably the best person to answer this, but as far as getting some data out of this, what do you see that timeline? What's that timeline look like that the community might see some of this information?
So our timeline, so right now we just did the field test. And again, the purpose of the field test is to refine the actual questions and what's going to be asked. Maybe we're going to remove questions, add questions, amend questions, etc. Next school year is the planned launch, official launch of the survey itself to all 20 districts.
Thank you. Looking at, did you guys have any reflection on how this data might benefit your organization and realign or help you focus on the things that you're interested in?
We're always trying to find ways to see how kids are disconnected or connected to their school days. And I run the truancy court and educational neglect programs at the Kent County Circuit Court. So we're constantly trying to figure out what's happening. And this is probably going to be one of the first opportunities we're going to have to hear it from the kids directly. We can talk about all sorts of sources for non-attendance. And if we can't get kids to be in school, then all of our focuses from that PN3 through the college kind of are not really focused on where we need to be. We need to have them in the seats. And so I'm really hoping that this is going to inform our approach to keeping kids in school and getting them reconnected to their school days. And I'm really excited to see the results of all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Judge Feeney. I think you bring up an interesting point there around virtual versus in person, right? And I wonder if any group out there reflected on social emotional impact from the pandemic. Was there any talk about that somebody wants to share? I'm just guessing that maybe there was. But.
Yeah, our group reflected on that a bit, just keeping in mind that the pilot data and even next spring might be affected. It's like it's baseline, but also it could be aware of the context of the pandemic that might be affecting this. But also on the socio-emotional learning, there was a lot of appreciation that it's given such a primary focus. And we had a couple of educators in our group, and I really liked how they said that really social emotional learning is a foundation. And then until you have that, you can't do the academic kind of work that we think. So whereas a lot of people think that the academic work is the primary stuff, and then if you have a little extra room in your schedule of the week, then you might add a little socio-emotional learning, but that's like flip-flopped of how it actually has to work in real life.
I just want to kind of share something that we talked about in our group, is that this is all really great, and I love that we are hearing from the students, but we talked a lot about what are we going to do with this, and if there are areas that are common themes where kids are struggling, do we have the adequate resources and programming to be able to deal with that rather than just gathering data? I think we have to be able to address it, otherwise there's no point in getting this information.
Absolutely, but we have to start with the data. Hetty Chang and all of her attendance works programs all start with the data. And I have to tell you folks that Kent County stands heads and shoulders above trying to get data. We're the only county in Michigan that has common definitions for chronic absenteeism and truancy. We don't even have a law that defines that, but the superintendents and the principals here in Kent County pulled together several years ago when we asked them to do that. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, but as soon as we have that data, I think that can then drive where we provide the additional services, because the services we've been putting in place based upon information that excludes or doesn't include the children's voices hasn't been as effective as we want it to be.
Well, I think to Judge Feeney's point also, in terms of our group really looking at, we need common definitions around social emotional learning, mental health and everything. And to really look at with the community health needs assessment, mental health was a huge issue that was raised within that, within their data as well. And I think for all of us and within our group, we span from, early childhood all the way through high school, really looking at this is going to help organizations really look at how they can better engage and retain students in their own work and how they fall within working within different school systems, and even within, the fair housing group, and really looking at how this could affect, schools of choice policies countywide, and really inform our policy work we're moving forward as a county on using it as a strong advocacy tool within the cities, counties, state, and as well as how we could really disaggregating that data down and really looking at those that are most affected. And what we've been finding, during this pandemic, it's our students of color who are experiencing the highest rates of anxiety and depression, but it's pretty much across all demographics. And what are we going to do with that data, and how are we going to put in place to the point of the capacity to help support the students after we get this data?
And who gets the data is the other piece too, right? Is this all going, you know, we were talking about similar things about the opportunity for responses, and how important it will be for there to be transparency so that we can develop community-based responses to issues that are lifted up through the survey. So that was a question that we had, was who, not only how can this data benefit us, but who gets to see it, who has access to it.
I also worked with both Carol and Judge Feeney as we try to ensure that our students are in place in school. I think what's exciting about this is the fact that we are putting our students in the center and receiving their feedback to hear what's going on with them. I think it also allows us, or we think, my group thinks, it also allows the opportunity to build trust with students. A lot of times we have expert informed decisions about what's best for our children, and we don't take the opportunity to hear from them. I know in discussion I just shared, as a mother, I thought I was knocking it out the park. And now I have 2 young adult children who have shared with me all of the things I thought I was doing well was not perceived or received by them well, okay? And that's because as adults, we think we know the answers, but now this is the opportunity for us to hear, what do they need? I think we also talked about in our group, just the fact that education and institutions are always focused on, it feels, higher achieving students and what that looks like. And there's a pressure to that too, that our children experience, feeling like they're not in the 3.0 to 4.0 criteria, or that they're not high achieving. And so I think this information will show us, has the opportunity to show us what students who are not coming to the table with all of the resources, what they struggle with and how they feel in school. And that gives us an opportunity to make decisions cater to the whole entire group of students versus just those that are, it seems to be higher performing. Like sometimes it seems like schools cater to that, but what are the needs of those who are not making it there, and how can we wrap resources around them? And so those were just some of the things. It also allows for transparency and what's happening across different school districts and how students are feeling in different environments, and allows us an opportunity to strategize. And so another thing that came along is timing. When will we give this to the students, and how long will it take us to put this information into action? That also builds trust with our student body and lets them know that because they've engaged in this type of work, this survey, and gave their honest answers, what are we going to do about it? And hopefully as we develop, as we use tools of this nature, you'll see more students getting involved because they believe that we actually care about what they're saying and that we actually see them and what their needs are that they declare to us. So those were some of the things that we thought.
Yeah, thank you for that. Some really powerful points and some interesting points. Let's see if I can scroll up in the chat here, just because I thought I saw some interesting things. So one of the things, if you're missing the chat, there was a discussion about, will it be disaggregated by race and ethnicity? Sunil said yes.
Yeah, all that is self-reported. So we ask questions about gender, race, and ethnicity for your reduced lunch, a number of different ways to disaggregate the data. And that's an important piece because we want to put a spotlight on equity and make sure that all kids are being served. So that was a very key piece of this survey itself. And we actually did ask a question about what educational setting kids were in, meaning were they in online, in-person, hybrid settings, so we could see the responses in different ways. Hopefully that changes in the future in terms of what educational settings are available, just given the pandemic, but that's one thing we did for the field test since that's kind of important.
Thanks, Sunil. I think Jamie and Courtney Myers-Keaton Jamie Vasevich and Courtney Myers-Keaton were having an interesting conversation in the chat about, how are we going to report this back to the students, the results, and are they going to be able to sort of comment on that, or I don't know if you have an answer for that, Sunil, but maybe a piece of feedback to take back.
I'm happy to jump in too. I think each local district will have to determine what fits their needs, but I think strong encouragement, as we do with the MyFi survey right now, which also is another measurement that we use to look at behaviors and substance abuse. A number of districts publish that on their websites so that parents and community members can see that we are making that connection with students. Similar, Sunil's done a wonderful job just taking the baseline field test data as we've looked for common themes, and we're still looking at creating validity around the questions. That's work we're doing right now with AIR. But once we're certain that the questions are the right questions, through my one focus group here, just talked about how important it is when we do share the data or help the students help us make sense of the data, that we do it with a trusted adult so the kids can help take that data and make it actionable. We always know, no matter how many times we communicate how data is used, we need to over communicate 7 different ways, as everyone listens at different times and we all need to know the information in order to be able to hear it. But I think that's an excellent point that we can bring back to KISA as we talk about how they use the data and how they add transparency to the data.
Great. This is a really robust discussion and I think we could go on, but I am getting that giant hook thing from my partners. So, you know, if you have further thoughts, obviously email us, call us, you know, get in contact. There's also we'll send out an evaluation and things like that. You can write more on that if you want. Because I think we could talk. And we also have, you know, your notes and things from your groups. So.
And our contact information, I think, is the next slide.
Yeah. Can we go one more slide, Taylor?
If we haven't, we could link in to the slide deck, the actual survey in a PDF form, as I heard people asking what types of questions. We could do that, right, Sunil?
Yeah. We can, if you, so this is our contact information. We could have further conversations about the field test itself.
And we'll send out a wrap-up email for the meeting. We'll send out all the materials and we'll make sure you get that contact information. If you're not, you know, writing it down now, we'll make sure you have that. And we can follow up with the PDF of the survey as well.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, I think we're handing it back over to Evelyn and Evelyn, right?
Yeah. Well, in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you so much for the time that you spent today with us. We know time is a commodity and long meetings and some can be exhausting. We want to please take a minute after this meeting to complete our evaluation form. We really appreciate your feedback and we want to encourage you to include comments in there. So please include as much recommendations as you can in there. With that being said, I would like for let's skip this one, Katie, and let's just, because it's already time. But let's make sure that you save the time and save the date for our next APC meeting in November. It's supposed to be scheduled on Friday, November 12th, 2021. And so we're hoping that you can join us then as well. Thank you so much.